The truth about tabloids. Why the Dakota Jamie rumors persist. The rumor began the way most modern rumors do, quietly, lazily, like a match struck in a windless room. A grainy photo, a headline shaped like a question, a thread of comments under a clip where two actors laughed at the wrong moment, the way people laugh when something lands too close to the heart. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't even a story. It was an invitation. And the public, exhausted and hungry and strangely hopeful, accepted. By the time I first wrote about it, the rumor already had a pulse. It had traveled across time zones and languages, shedding context as it went, growing cleaner and simpler with every retelling. Dakota and Jamie. The names carried a certain electricity. They sounded like a sentence that wanted to be finished. It didn't matter that the actual lives attached to those names were complicated, private, and distinctly separate. That they had partners they loved, families, roots, ordinary joys that didn't fit into a headline. To the rumor, none of that was important. Because tabloid mythology doesn't feed on facts. It feeds on desire. I learned that on a Tuesday morning, standing in the fluorescent-lit newsroom of The Glare, a celebrity site that insisted, publicly, that it was just for fun, but operated, privately, like a factory that refined longing into clickable shapes. My editor, Vince, slid a file across the table with the bored grace of a man handing someone a menu. Dakota Jamie, he said. I stared at the folder. It wasn't a folder, really. It was a collection of screenshots. A few interview stills. A red carpet wave. A behind-the-scenes clip where his hand hovered near her back. Hovering was the key word. It contained plausible innocence, which was the rumor's favorite ingredient. Again? I asked. Vince leaned back. Again. Always again. He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. It's the most reliable flame in the whole circus. Give people what they came for. What they came for, in Vince's vocabulary, meant something that felt like love without requiring anyone to risk anything real. I flipped through the screenshots. They were the sort of images any 2 coworkers might share, friendly, warm, human. If you wanted them to be romantic, they could be. If you wanted them to be purely professional, they could be that too. That was the brilliance of it. Ambiguity was a mirror. People could pour themselves into it. Why do they still care? I asked, more to myself than to Vince. Vince shrugged, already bored of the question. Because they want to. Because it sells. Because it's a story that isn't over until people stop buying tickets. He stood, signaling the meeting was done. Write it like you believe it, but not so much we can get sued. Sprinkle, sources, insiders, body language expert. You know, the usual. He walked away, leaving me with the folder and the familiar sick taste of compromise. I used to tell myself tabloid writing was harmless. It was sugar. It was noise. A silly distraction from a world that had too many sharp edges. But standing there with those images, I couldn't shake the sense that we were doing something more intimate than entertainment. We were manufacturing a collective dream, and then charging people to keep dreaming it. My name is Mara, and I did not start out wanting to write about famous people. I started out wanting to write about stories. I studied journalism because I believed facts were sacred. I wanted to investigate systems, expose corruption, tell the truth in a way that changed something. I wanted to make the world clearer, not louder. But clarity doesn't always pay rent. After graduation, when the newsroom jobs disappeared and the bills piled up, I took what I could get. A job at The Glare, writing quick celebrity pieces with titles like 10 times he looked at her like she was the only one in the room. At first, I told myself it was temporary. A year became 2, 2 became 5. By then, I could tell which rumors would explode before they did. Which couples would spark obsession. Which ones would fade like smoke. I learned the rhythm of it, how the public moved in herds, how attention worked like gravity, how certain pairings were simply stickier. Dakota and Jamie were the stickiest of all. They were a rumor that refused to die. And it wasn't because there was fresh evidence. It was because, in the public imagination, they had become symbols. Not of real-life romance, but of something the audience longed for. I wrote the assigned piece that day, because I was paid to. I made it careful. I used the tabloid language of suggestion. Fans are convinced. Social media has erupted. Some speculate. Their chemistry remains undeniable. I quoted tweets, because tweets are the easiest kind of proof. I embedded a compilation video titled, "The Way He Looks at Her, Please," because the internet loves caps lock the way children love candy. I didn't invent anything. I didn't claim an affair. I didn't say anyone cheated. But I did what tabloids do best. I framed ordinary interactions as romantic suspense. By lunchtime, the article had 100,000 views. By dinner, it had 500,000. Vince messaged me a single word. Yup. That night, I sat on my couch scrolling through the comments, watching the rumor breed. Some people were playful. I shipped them so hard, they are endgame, my Roman Empire. Others were angry at the partners in their real lives, angry at reality itself for refusing to match the fantasy. She deserves someone who looks at her like that, someone wrote. As if her boyfriend isn't enough, another replied. Someone else posted a paragraph-long essay analyzing the angle of a smile. I stared at my phone until my eyes blurred. Then I typed, "Dakota Jamie rumor why," into the search bar and watched years of speculation flood the screen. Like a river that never reached the ocean. The question wouldn't leave me. Why this rumor? Why this pairing? Why did it persist when other myths dissolve? I knew the shallow answers. Chemistry, timing, fandom culture, algorithms. But those were the mechanics, not the heart. The heart was something else. The heart was longing. And longing, I was starting to realize, was the most powerful engine in the tabloid machine. 2 days later, I received an email from a reader. Subject: please read. The body was long and strangely tender. The sender was a woman named Alina. She said she had watched those films during the worst year of her life, during a breakup that left her feeling like she'd been hollowed out. I know it's not real, she wrote. I know actors act, but the way they looked at each other made me believe love could still exist. Like, not perfect love, but love that sees you. She added, when the world feels cold, people hold on to warm stories. Even if they're not true. I stared at her words for a long time. Then I opened my own article and read it again with fresh eyes. What had I given people? Not truth, not lies exactly, but not truth either. I had given them permission to believe. Tabloids didn't just report fantasies. They curated them. They kept them alive. If you want to understand why the Dakota Jamie rumors persist, you have to understand what the public thinks it saw. Not the contracts, not the schedules, not the PR training. What the public thinks it saw is chemistry. Chemistry is one of the strangest words we have for human connection because it sounds like science but behaves like magic. Chemistry is not the same as romance, but people confuse them constantly because chemistry triggers the same part of the brain that romance does. The part that watches for meaning in small signals. A glance, a laugh, a pause. Two people on screen can create the illusion of a bond so vivid it feels like it must exist off-screen too, because the audience experiences it as real. The audience's body responds. Their heart accelerates. Their breath catches. And the body doesn't care if something is fictional. The body only cares if something moves it. For many viewers, Dakota and Jamie filled an emotional void they didn't know they had. They offered a story of intensity, of understanding, of being seen. And when the credits rolled, the viewers were left with the ache that always follows a powerful narrative. Where does that feeling go now? The answer, for many people, was into the rumor. Because a rumor is a way to keep a story alive after the ending. A rumor is a sequel the audience writes themselves. I decided, quietly, to investigate my own industry. Not in a dramatic exposé way. Not in a way that would get me fired, because I still needed rent. But in a private way. A personal inquiry. I started collecting examples of how the rumor was fueled. A fan-made montage posted on TikTok with sad music, cutting between their interviews like it was a forbidden romance. A YouTube body language expert, insisting that a shoulder angle meant secret love. An anonymous insider, claiming they never stopped caring, a phrase so vague it could mean anything. A blog describing their cosmic connection, as if two colleagues couldn't simply respect each other. And then the real fuel. The comments, the shares, the obsessive threads. The public wasn't just consuming the rumor. They were co-writing it. I reached out to a friend who worked in analytics. She sent me data that made my stomach turn. Dakota Jamie content spiked every time the world felt darker, during major crises, during heavy news cycles, during seasons when people were lonelier. We track mood, she said bluntly. When stress goes up, shipping goes up. Shipping was fandom slang for wishing two people would be together. But they have partners, I said, though I knew it didn't matter. Exactly, my friend replied. It's safer because it's impossible. People can fantasize without having to confront the reality of actual relationships. No one has to risk rejection. No one has to do the hard work of love. I hung up the call and sat in silence, my own reflection faintly visible in the dark screen of my laptop. So that was part of it. The rumor persisted because it was safe longing. A love story that could never break your heart in real life. Only in imagination. Still, safety alone didn't explain the almost mythical aura around this pairing. So I dug deeper. I found the oldest seeds of the rumor. Interviews where they teased each other, comfortable and quick, like people who understood timing. Behind-the-scenes clips where they laughed too hard, like laughter was the only defense against pressure. I watched them again, not to prove romance, but to observe what the public was feeding on. What I saw was something simpler and more human than scandal. Trust. In work that demanded vulnerability, they had built a visible trust. They could push and tease and still remain safe. They could hold tension without it collapsing into discomfort. Audiences were starving for that kind of connection. Not necessarily romantic connection, but connection that felt genuine. And the world didn't have a lot of language for genuine connection between a man and a woman that wasn't sexual or romantic. So it labeled it romance. Because romance was the template people understood. And tabloids, my world, were eager to reinforce that template, because it made money. If you frame a bond as friendship or mutual respect, it has a gentle warmth. If you frame it as forbidden longing, it becomes fire. Fire spreads faster. The hardest part of the rumor, the part one rarely saw acknowledged, was the collateral damage. Not to the celebrities themselves. They had PR teams and security and money and emotional calluses built over years. The collateral damage was quieter. It was the way real partners were treated as obstacles. It was the way enduring loves were dismissed as inconvenient facts. It was the way the rumor trained people to see commitment as boring and tension as truth. I read one comment that said, "You can tell he's not happy with his wife. Look at his eyes." The certainty of it made me feel sick. Because it revealed the ugliest part of tabloid culture. The belief that you can know a stranger's marriage through a photo. That you can claim ownership over someone's emotional life because you watched them on a screen. It wasn't just fantasy anymore. It was entitlement. And entitlement, dressed up as romance, was still entitlement. A week later, I attended a party, industry people, writers, editors, a few minor celebrities. The kind of event where everyone pretends they aren't networking while they network. In a corner, I met Nico, a photographer who had been in the business forever. He had the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much and still had to pretend it was normal. "You write for the Glare, right?" he asked, sipping his drink. I nodded. He smirked. "Ah, the temple of imagination. I like to think of it as the temple of rent," I said. He laughed, then grew serious. "You want to know why those rumors persist?" "Yes," I admitted. Nico leaned in. "Because the public doesn't actually care about the truth. They care about the feeling the story gives them. And that pairing gives them a feeling that's rare." "What feeling?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked past me at the party, the glittering people. "Hope," he said finally. "Hope that something intense and meaningful can exist without being ruined by ordinary life." He shrugged, like hope was a foolish thing. A rumor is cleaner than reality. I thought about what Alina had written. Warm stories. I thought about the data showing shipping spiked when stress rose. Maybe the rumor wasn't just gossip. Maybe it was an emotional coping mechanism, collective escapism shaped like romance. That didn't make it harmless. But it made it understandable. That night, I went home and wrote something I couldn't publish. A private piece, just for me. I titled it, "The Love Story That Never Quite Was." I wrote about the difference between on-screen chemistry and real life. About how acting can create a truth that exists only in the moment of performance, and yet feels profound. About how audiences sometimes confuse felt with is. I wrote about the ache of wanting a story to continue. And I wrote about my own complicity. Because the truth was, I had helped the rumor live. Every time I wrote, fans speculate. Every time I framed a glance as a confession, I was feeding the myth. And myths, once fed, don't just linger. They grow teeth. The next time Vince assigned me another Dakota Jamie piece, I surprised myself by saying, no. He stared at me as if I'd told him I was quitting Oxygen. No? I'll write about the film, I said carefully. About the craft. About why people connect. But I won't write another romance bait rumor piece. Vince scoffed. You're getting principled now? Maybe, I said, though my voice shook. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. This isn't a moral crusade, Mara. It's a business. I know, I said. But the business is built on people's loneliness. Vince laughed sharply. So? I didn't have a clean answer. Because he was right. The world didn't run on ethics. It ran on appetite. But I had started to feel the cost of feeding it. You can give them a story without lying, I said. Vince's expression was unreadable. He waved a hand like he was brushing away a fly. Fine, he said finally. Write your little think piece. But if it tanks, that's on you. I left his office feeling both terrified and oddly lighter. I wrote the piece. Not a rumor piece. A reflection. I wrote about why chemistry becomes a canvas for projection. About how fans attach to certain pairings because they represent a kind of connection people crave. About how the myth persists because it offers an emotional narrative that real life often doesn't provide. Intensity without mess. Longing without boredom. Love without laundry. I wrote gently about their separate, enduring real-life loves, emphasizing that reality deserves respect. I wrote about how rumors can flatten real humans into characters, and how we should be careful what we demand from strangers. It wasn't preachy. I tried to keep it honest. I titled it, "The Truth About Tabloids: Why the Rumors Persist." Vince hated the title. But he posted it anyway. The reaction was not what I expected. Some readers were furious. Stop ruining our fun. It's not that deep. Let people ship. Why do you care so much? But others, quietly, like people admitting something tender, responded differently. I needed this. I didn't realize how much I projected. I love the fantasy, but I don't want to hurt anyone. This made me think about why I crave these stories. Alina emailed again. Subject: thank you. This doesn't make the warmth go away, she wrote. It just makes me feel less ashamed of needing it, and more aware of where to put it. Where to put it. That phrase stayed with me. Because maybe the solution wasn't to mock longing or forbid fantasy. Maybe the solution was to treat longing with respect, and then guide it somewhere less destructive. Into art, into fiction that doesn't pretend to be fact, into stories that don't require real humans to be sacrificed for entertainment. I thought the rumor would fade after that. It didn't. Of course it didn't. My piece was a drop in an ocean. The algorithm didn't care about nuance. It cared about engagement, and engagement loved conflict more than reflection. The rumor kept breathing. A new clip surfaced. A new analysis thread went viral. A new headline asked a new question. But something in me had shifted. I stopped writing the rumor as if it were a secret truth. I started writing about the mechanism of the rumor, the way an anthropologist might write about ritual. Because that's what it was. A ritual of modern longing. See two people connect on screen. Feel something real in your body. Refuse to let the feeling end. Build a story where it continues forever. And forever, in tabloid time, is just another week. Once you see the mechanism, you start seeing it everywhere. The way people cling to narratives that promise fate. The way, almost love, feels more dramatic than stable love. The way audiences sometimes prefer yearning to commitment because yearning never has to face the ordinary. A real relationship has mornings, arguments, grocery lists, misunderstandings, compromise. A rumor has only the best parts. A rumor is all spark, no ash. And so it persists, not because it's true, but because it's satisfying. It scratches an itch. It fills a gap. It offers the fantasy of a love story that remains forever suspended in the most delicious moment, the moment right before the kiss. Because once the kiss happens, life begins. And life, for many people, is where disappointment lives. So they keep the rumor in the pre-kiss moment, where anything is possible, and nothing can be ruined. Months later, I was walking home late when I passed a bookstore window displaying romance novels. Bright covers, dramatic titles, couples locked in perfectly timed embraces. I stopped and stared. Because it hit me, suddenly, with disarming simplicity. The public didn't really want Dakota and Jamie. They wanted a story that felt like them. They wanted a romance that carried intensity and tenderness and that specific flavor of chemistry that made viewers believe in fate. The pairing became a symbol because it delivered that emotional hit so effectively. In a world where people felt disconnected, anxious, unseen, overworked, lonely, watching two characters see each other with that kind of attention felt like medicine. And medicine is addictive. Especially when your life hurts. The rumor persisted because people weren't just gossiping. They were self-soothing. They were using someone else's imagined love story to fill their own emotional void. That didn't make it right. But it made it tragically human. The last time I wrote about the rumor, I wrote a different ending. Not an ending that claimed truth. An ending that offered a choice. I wrote, maybe the most loving thing we can do is let stories stay where they belong. On screen, in books, in songs, in imagination, and let real people keep the lives they have chosen. Maybe we can honor chemistry as art without demanding it become reality. Maybe the love story that never quite was still mattered, because it made you feel. And feeling is not nothing. I expected Vince to cut it. He didn't. Maybe even Vince, for all his cynicism, had felt the ache too. Or maybe he realized reflection could be profitable, if packaged right. Either way, it went up. The rumor didn't die. But for some readers, the grip loosened. For some, the myth became less of a demand and more of a memory. A beautiful illusion that had served its purpose. Sometimes people ask me now, at parties, do you think there was ever something between them? I answer honestly. I think there was something real on screen. And I think it made people hungry for more. That's the point of good storytelling. They look disappointed, as if I've taken away their favorite toy. But then I add. And I think it's possible to love a story without needing it to be true. That usually makes them quiet. Because it forces them to confront the real question, the one beneath all rumors. What are you really longing for? Not their relationship. Yours. Not their chemistry. The feeling of being seen. Not their imagined love story. The hope that love, gentle, enduring, imperfect, can exist for you too. And that hope is not shameful. It's human. The tragedy is when we chase that hope through tabloids, through strangers' lives, through fantasies that demand sacrifices from people who never agreed to be our medicine. But the beauty is that longing can be redirected. Into art. Into friendship. Into healing. Into creating the kind of love story you actually need. One that is real, messy, and yours. Because the love story that never quite was, can still teach you what you want. And wanting, when handled with care, can be a map. Not to someone else's imagined romance. But back to yourself.